I'm Marnie Webb. I'm the CEO of TechSoup, and this is a TechSoup Talk. This one I'm doing with Patrick Callihan, Pat, the CEO of Tech Impact, longtime partner and friend. And we're going to be talking about why the nonprofit sector deserves a CTO and anything else that sneaks its way into the conversation.
Great to be here. I'm wondering what took us so long.
I know. So Pat and I have had the opportunity to know each other and work together for a long time now. Our two organizations have collaborated quite a bit. And most recently, we launched a project, a program called the Virtual CTO for nonprofit organizations. And we were really focused on bringing CTO level guidance to nonprofit organizations with budgets $1 million and under. And Pat, when we came up with the idea and decided to do it in one of our conference rooms in San Francisco, and neither one of us knew what was going to happen,
Yeah,
actually, when we did it, but we were like, let's try. Let's just back up that story a little bit and
yeah.
share a little bit why you think that small organizations deserve a CTO. Because that's one of the first comments we got, right? Is, but an organization under $1 million doesn't need a CTO.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important to point out that most nonprofits are below $1 million, right? I think it's like 95% of nonprofits in the United States have operating budgets below $1 million. So I think on one hand, it's important to distinguish that we're hitting the masses here. And those are the organizations that are really doing so much of the groundswell of work in their communities. You don't know them. They're not brand names. You haven't heard of them maybe, but they're the ones that are on the front line dealing with a multitude of issues. Often they're led by founders because they're very passionate about a particular subject or a particular area of mission. And so their inclination is to try to put as much of their energy and resources and funds into their mission and less in technology, right? And I think that's fine and it's noble, but I think over time what happens is those organizations grow because they become more and more relevant. And as they grow, they start to maybe hire people and bring in more people, and I don't know, their challenges are greater. Right now, they've got to raise more money. They've got to reach more constituents. They've got to do more in order to meet the mission objective that they're seeking. And so technology then can also become an inhibitor at that point. So yeah, when we got together, I think the conversation between the two of us is, hey, here's Tech Impact, a services-based organization, and we do some things really well. And here's TechSoup, who brings all kinds of resources to many hundreds of thousands of nonprofits across the US. And we said, what could we do together that would make an impact? And this is where we landed. And I tell you, I think we're really smart.
Yeah, tell me more. Tell me, say that right good here, Pat.
I'm teasing, but I think what we did was listen to each other and say, what are you seeing out there? And what am I
Yeah,
seeing out there?
yeah.
And together we said, okay, if we brought our resources together, there's some things we could do. We were doing a lot of these tech checks, which is something our organization designed. And it's not anything more than an assessment, but assessments are important because they ground you in, hey, here are best practices from the sector in technology, and here is where I am with my technology, and here's the gap. And we all have one, right? And it could show up in a lot of different places. It could be in cybersecurity, it could be in data, it could be in the infrastructure, all kinds of places, but there's gaps. And what we want to do is try and address those gaps, right? So that's really what that assessment is all about. And it explores several different areas of an organization. One is infrastructure, like I said, productivity and collaboration, which I think is becoming more and more of an issue, security and continuity, data and strategic systems, as well as supporting your environment and governance. And so if you take those areas and then great, now we map out our capability maturity, if you will. We look at best practices, the gaps. Then we say, well, okay, what do we do with that? And that's really where I think your organization shines, our organization shines, because we then consult, right? Because it's one thing to provide a report. It's another to have a conversation about how relevant are these things to your mission? How important are these things to you? And where do we start? What are the projects we should start with? What are the investments we should be thinking about? What should we be going to our funders and asking for? There's a whole lot in there. There's a lot to unpack. Obviously, I don't want to get too deep.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think one of the things that we saw certainly is that something like 80% of the organizations that TechSoup serves every year have budgets under $1 million. And we could see that those organizations weren't taking advantage of services because they couldn't afford them.
Yeah.
And so they do. One of our prevailing beliefs is that based on experience and surveys and everything else is that the organizations of that size were getting CTO level advice, but they were getting it from articles, from blog posts, from board members that maybe worked at other kinds of companies with other kinds of resources. They were getting it from volunteers. And so it had two problems. One, the advice wasn't necessarily coming from people that knew what it's like to be a nonprofit
Mm,
and the kind of choices a nonprofit has to make and the restrictions that nonprofits have on how they spend money and all of those kinds of things, as well as the size. And they weren't getting it from a consistent point of view. So it wasn't with nonprofits at its heart. It wasn't with a consistent point of view. And it's always going to have gaps in it when you're patching together that advice from different sources. It's always going to have gaps. And so what we believe the value of working with you all is bringing a consistent point of view on what it means to manage your technology so it serves your mission and really thinking about that strategic guidance, but also people that are keeping an eye out so they can say things like, hey, if, the security issue that you may have seen in the news, this is whether you should know if you should worry about it or not.
mm,
Or Microsoft just changed the name of this feature. It's here. This is why you should use it or not. So again, it's not necessarily just like a CTO that works for a large company isn't going to dig in and build the website or do the thing. That's not the job of a CTO, right? The job of a CTO is to know the roadmap of technology and the trends of technology generally, understand how they influence the organization, be on the lookout for risks and help identify and manage those and make sure that the organization is putting the things in place that keep it from being more fragile than it needs to be. And I think when we looked at the opportunity to provide that kind of guidance with, as you said, our reach but your deep expertise in the offices of organizations over time, providing those services, it felt like a real opportunity to bring that consistent strategic perspective to these small organizations. I'll say when we put it out there, I didn't know if it was going to land with a thud, what was going to happen, so that we had over 200 organizations across the US. Actually, we had some, I don't know if you know this, Pat, I just found out, some from outside of the US
mm.
signed up, mostly on the basis of LinkedIn posts. We knew we had a nerve there, right? And something
Yeah.
that they needed. And I think as we go forward, we want to understand, how do we bring this sustainably to these
Yeah.
organizations, because we know they can't pay for a fractional CTO sitting in their office, and we can't afford to just set somebody there all the time. So how are we putting together this packaging that lets us do this in ways that are affordable for these organizations and don't cause us to stop supporting them the second a grant runs out?
Yeah. I think that is a challenge, right? Cost is king, right? And you have limited resources and you want to figure out how to best use them. And it's a challenge for, especially for small nonprofits. Where are they going to allocate their dollars? And you hit this on the head. What is the role of the CTO? It's a few things. One is strategy. And the strategy there is really, it's not a technology strategy. It's, what is your strategic plan? What are you trying to accomplish? And how can technology play a role in that or support you in that? Certainly one area, but also it's stability and security and understanding where the risks are so that you can
Yeah.
mitigate those risks appropriately. And those are changing all the time, right? And so it's
Yeah.
hard if you're an executive director of an organization trying to keep up with that while fundraising, while running your operations, while trying to work on your mission. It's incredibly difficult. This offers a slice of time and expertise and tools to help these organizations really, than anything, probably develop a plan, right? It's not everything is going to get solved. It's going to get solved over time. And I think, and part of the packaging too, and we should talk about this, is Quad. And where does Quad fit into this, right? Because now, as part of this, you're a member of TechSoup, you're a member of TechSoup Quad. So really at the highest level of your membership, and that gives you access to more consulting, it gives you access to more discounts. And here I am selling out your value proposition. You probably know this better than me, but
But
there's a
do
lot
so
in there.
anyway.
But there's a lot in there for what, $400, which can seem like a lot, but that's not a lot. And
Yeah.
thankfully, we've had a partner step up, right? Okta came in and provided us some funding, and we were able to use that in a very productive way. And really, I think I share, you know, your vision that we want to see more funders step into this, right? Because when these organizations are strong, that means the sector is stronger. That means the grantors and their grantees are stronger, right?
Yeah.
If I was making grants, I'd be concerned about the organizations I'm granting to. Do they have proper fortification for cybersecurity? How are they managing their data? Some of the same questions that are going to get asked in the boardroom, but coming directly from funders. And if I'm running that organization, I want to be able to answer those questions
Yeah.
and have a reason to go back to them for more funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were lucky to have a partner like Okta. I just can't say enough good about the fact that we both had grants already from Okta. We'd written the
Yeah.
grant before, and then we were talking about this, and we were like, it fits in the corner of those grants. And we went back and talked to the team there, and they were like, go for it. And it really demonstrates what happens when you have a close relationship with the collaborator and you're good for delivery because we worked together before and we have a joint funder that is very willing to listen and change. So I can't say enough good about that support. And we would like other funders to join in. Right now with these first organizations, we've done like 40 or so of the assessments, and I was poking through them a little bit the other day. And it's really interesting to start seeing the trends across them because part of the goal is not just that we're helping those individual organizations with advice. That's not what's going to make it sustainable over time. What's going to make it sustainable over time is we're building communities of peers that can also start to help each other and that we can find out what their common needs are so we can do a better job of negotiating
Mm.
donations and discounts and grants that meet the actual needs of organizations on the ground. One of the things that's interesting in the first round of the assessment is there were sort of three buckets: folks that needed some support on baseline, often security and operational things just to get their house in order. And it's stuff like setting up multi-factor authentication or doing those kinds of activities, right? And then this second level of organization where they had a lot of great practices, but they weren't documented and shared. And a lot of them were in the heads of one person,
Yeah.
which makes the systems vulnerable, right? To that person leaving, to change, to being able to get help. And it limits the knowledge to what that person has. And that's a lot of responsibility and stress for one person to hold. And then there were organizations that were performing above what you would expect, right? And the great thing about having those organizations in a peer community is that they can provide a demonstrated path of how groups can move forward. So we're hoping that this learning gives us ways to think about, okay, if system documentation and process documentation is part of the problem, that's one of the things AI is actually awesome at, is taking a bunch of information and saying, can you take these practices and we do this, and this person's going to record something for 15 minutes, and we want you to turn that into system documentation,
Mm.
AI robot friend. And so where are those kinds of opportunities where we could actually set up that little AI agent that's supporting organizations in documenting their systems in non-intrusive ways, right? When they already have a lot of those things in place. And then where the other thing, we just see this massive need for hardware. We see it in those assessments. We see it. We did right before Christmas, we dropped a little survey that was like, how would you spend 2,000 technology bucks? Actually, people on the call tell us if you just got $2,000, but you had to spend it on technology, how would you spend it? But the number one answer was hardware,
Fascinating.
actually. And we saw that in some other things, 3 new PCs, first answer in there. And so when we start putting people together like this, are there opportunities for us to negotiate bulk purchases? on behalf of the organization so that we can use those kind of tactics to help lower the cost of technology for these organizations. What is it that we could be doing, and how can we be helping groups, and how can we support making a relatively modest amount of money go a long way for
Mhm.
each of these organizations? Somebody answered, I just want to jump to one of the questions, two
Yeah.
questions that I saw floating past. One is, why is it not available outside the USA?
Mhm.
We decided to learn in the US first, actually. That's the biggest reason. We're both US-based organizations, but we'll be having some announcements in the next 3, 4 months about extending outside of the United States. And if you're outside of the United States and you're really interested, shoot us a note, because there are some circumstances where we can make some exceptions to it. We also are subsidizing this with a grant and need to either have grant funding or have the appropriate pricing available for nonprofit organizations. So that's the hard limits, but we didn't want to go larger with the launch until we knew a little bit more about what the reaction was going to be and what organizations were going to need. I also saw a question earlier where somebody asked why this isn't available to organizations over 1 million, or would it be available? And again, I think what we wanted to do was learn in this contained group, and a group that we knew could not get their need met by hiring somebody or even getting a consultant, and did not have a dedicated IT staffer. And so we decided to contain to that group at first. As we learn, we'll expand and grow. I think, Pat, as you think about, okay, it's one thing for us to come up with a program, be proud of ourselves, get it out into the world. But what do you think that we need? Funding, of course, if any of you are funders, we're both nonprofit organizations. Funding, of course, but what else do you think that we're going to need to put in place to make this successful?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think I said this to you the other day. We're scratching the surface here. Like, this is a great start, right? And to your point, when you dig into the data, you're going to learn some things. And hopefully, what we can do collectively is take those learnings and then parlay them into solutions or offerings back to the sector, right? If we see the main need is hardware, great. Then what kind of program can we layer it into something like that that provides an advantage for hardware? I saw a security assessment of our M365 environment, our Microsoft 365 environment.
Yeah,
Great call out, right? Like, that would be a great use of some funding and something that's like next layer, right? If you go through this assessment, it may call out that, hey, you haven't had a security assessment of your Microsoft 365 environment. That's a good next project where, to think about in terms of best practices. Great. If we see a bunch of that's something we can go back to and take to funders and say, hey, look, we're seeing a lot of need out there for Microsoft 365 assessments. We're seeing a lot of need out there for hardware purchases. Like, how can we address this collectively as a sector to make sure that the nonprofits that are supporting our communities are getting the resources that they need to be successful? So I think that's part of it. And you touched on AI, and certainly that's another area, right? That's going to come up in the assessment, and it's going to come up in your board meetings and with your constituents and everywhere else. And it's, how do you make sense of all this? How do you make sense of all these tools? And so I think that's also where Quad comes in quite a bit, right? You have more training opportunities as a Quad member. You have more opportunities to, I think, communities of practice, and communities of practice are incredibly important, right? So if you work inside of a food bank or some other social service, and you're all trying to tackle the same issues and maybe different geographies, what can you learn from each other? How is one organization leveraging AI that's increasing their productivity, increasing their efficiency, and maybe helping them reach more people? How can you also take advantage of that? Because you're not really competing you're trying to solve the same issues in a different place. And so many of those issues you can learn from each other. So I think those
yeah.
communities of practice are incredibly important too.
Yeah. We talk a lot about the idea of like communities of practice, communities of purpose, right? So communities of purpose, you're all working on this common thing. It may not even be your mission. It may just be that the young people that come to you for after school tutoring also need meals on the weekends because they don't have the school meals to support them. It may be that you're providing workforce development training to veterans and you're providing meals or a food pantry as a part of that service, right? So how do we bring together so those folks can learn from each other? Especially what we see is that small organizations are the first to recognize need in their community and change. They move towards that need. They don't run away from it towards the solve problem. They're running towards the hard stuff that's stopping their fellow community members from thriving. And
Mm,
so how do we support organizations with that kind of flexibility and lesson sharing, I think is an important concept. I was just talking to somebody from the accountability lab last week, and she was talking about the way in which they've done these cohort assessments, and they've determined that part of what makes a successful cohort is participants being at different levels because it provides a stronger opportunity for people to learn from each other in terms of ongoing support. It's different if you're saying like, hey, today we're getting together to implement Box. You want everybody in the same space, right? Because you're going through some structured activity together. And I think what's the challenge I feel like we're running towards, our hard challenge, our unsolved challenge is how do you sustainably bring support to these small organizations? How do you bring advice to them? And then what can we do to bring money to them so they can actually implement the advice and they can keep it going? Because that's an important part. Traditionally, TechSoup has done that by helping lower the cost of technology. But what are the other mechanisms that we could do? Could we jointly, for example, operate a small fund
mm.
that gave participants in this kind of a program some money to spend on their urgent technology needs?
Or a big fund.
Or a big fund, a big fund, big fund. Hidden heroes. I have a mentor from years ago that was like, Webb, whatever number you say, just add a zero and then say it. So a
That's
big
that's
fund.
great advice.
Yeah.
That's great advice because I wish we had that, right? I wish we had this. This is how I think about it sometimes, right? When you think about like a foundation, right? A foundation has, let's just say, $100 million in assets, and every year they need to spend 5% of those assets, right? But 5% of 100 million is a lot of money, right? What if we had something like that for the nonprofit sector that every year was spinning off amounts of money
Yeah,
so that one, it was sustainable over a very long period of time, but two, that there was access to that kind of money for nonprofits to get stronger, get better, and do more in their community. I think it would just be
absolutely, absolutely. And larger nonprofits, they need that money too, but they might be able to access some of it via the existing funding
true.
streams, or they might have enough revenue to be able to manage that. But small organizations, with the way that software as a service has moved us towards annual payments,
Yeah.
the way that you do need hardware upgrades to take advantage of new technology, that's all of that is so real for these organizations. And we're renting our tech now for the most part. We're not
Yeah.
owning it anymore. And so I think these funds, my dream, if I can share it with you, it's that a fund like this can support the small organizations so they can thrive at the size they are and they don't have to grow if they don't want to. If their whole model is around supporting young people getting to an after school art class, that is an awesome service in their community. And if they don't have to get bigger,
Yeah.
but we want them to keep doing that. And we want them to be able to keep the names and addresses of those young people secure. And we
Yeah.
want them to be able to engage with their volunteers and in ways that are secure and their local donors in ways that are secure. But it's not always about growth. And then for those that are growing or getting bigger or getting stronger, or maybe what happened in Nashville, Tennessee a couple years ago when some big food security organizations closed, the other organizations had to step into that space. Right? And so these kind of structures can support all of that. So if we could have a fund that we could distribute to these organizations so they can spend money on the tech that we all know they need. I think figuring that out and attaching to that is the next challenge for us to run towards.
Sure.
I know we're hitting the minute mark, so
Okay.
sing us home. Close us out.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. And I know we're going to get some time together next month. And I look forward to it because I think we could talk all day about this, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's just so much there. And it's wonderful to have such a great partner to work with on issues like this. I think we both deeply care about the sector and we understand the ways technology can be helpful there. So I look forward to doing more of this with you. So thank you.
Me too. I look forward to what we're going to learn as we keep working on this. So thanks a lot, Pat. Super appreciate you being here today and spending this 30 minutes with me, folks. Thanks very much for joining us. All right. Thank you all very much.